I was reviewing soil contamination reports at my desk in the EPA's regional office when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Gerald Whitmore, my father's attorney. Gerald wasn't the kind of man who called to make small talk. He drafted my father's estate documents, managed his business interests for 2 decades, and attended every Christmas dinner with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything else. When he called, it meant something had shifted. I stepped out into the hallway and answered. "Rachel," he said, and the way he used my name instead of jumping straight to business told me what kind of call this was. "I'm sorry to tell you this. Your father passed away Tuesday evening. It was his heart. He went peacefully." I leaned against the wall. My father and I hadn't been close in the traditional sense. He was a man who showed love through action rather than words, who paid my college tuition without being asked, and never once mentioned it again. We talked on Sundays. I visited twice a year. He came to my college graduation and sat in the front row without being told where to sit. "Rachel," Gerald continued, "there's something else. Your father updated his estate documents 8 months ago. He left everything to you. The house in Asheville, the investment portfolio, his shares in Whitmore Industrial, all of it. We're talking about an estimated value of $63 million. I didn't say anything for a long moment. The number didn't process the way numbers usually do. It just sat there, enormous and weightless at the same time. "Does my brother know?" I asked. Gerald paused. "Not yet. That's why I'm calling you first. My brother Daniel was 38, 3 years older than me, and he had been my father's shadow for most of his adult life. He'd worked at Whitmore Industrial for 15 years, managed 2 of its regional divisions, and spent every holiday reminding anyone who would listen that he was the one keeping the company running. He believed, without question, that when the time came, everything would pass to him. I told Gerald I needed a few days before we met in person. He agreed. I hung up, stood in that hallway for another full minute, then walked back to my desk and stared at the soil contamination report without reading a single word. The drive back to my apartment that evening felt longer than usual. I kept the radio off. I thought about my father sitting across from Gerald 8 months ago, making deliberate choices about what he was leaving behind, and to whom. He hadn't mentioned it to me. He hadn't given me a warning or a reason. He'd simply decided. I thought about Daniel, his face when he found out, the way his jaw would go tight before the words came. I called my closest friend from graduate school, a woman named Priya who worked in public health and had excellent judgment about when to push back and when to just listen. I told her what Gerald had said. She was quiet for a moment. "When are you telling Daniel?" she asked. "I'm not," I said. "Not yet. I need to meet with Gerald first. Sign the documents. Understand exactly what I'm dealing with before I walk into that conversation." Priya didn't argue. She understood the logic. In situations like this, information was the only real protection. I scheduled the meeting with Gerald for the following Thursday, which gave me 6 days. 6 days to think clearly, organize my questions, and figure out what came next. I told no one else. I went to work. I reviewed my reports. I ran in the mornings and cooked dinner at night and kept every part of my routine exactly the same, because routine was the only thing that kept the size of the number from swallowing my concentration whole. On the 5th day, my brother called. I almost didn't answer, but letting it go to voicemail felt like a decision I couldn't take back, so I picked up. "Hey," Daniel said. His voice was casual in the deliberate way that meant he was working towards something. "You doing okay? I heard from Aunt Carol that you took some personal days." "Just dealing with Dad's stuff," I said. "Arrangements and paperwork, you know how it is." "Right," he said. "Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. I've been talking to Gerald. He said there's a meeting scheduled next week." My stomach tightened. He mentioned that. I figured we could go together. Present a united front. Family handling things as a team. The phrase sounded rehearsed. I'd heard Daniel use that particular tone before, smooth and collaborative on the surface, but underneath it he was already positioning. "I think Gerald wants to meet individually first," I said carefully. "Standard process." Daniel laughed once, short. "Rachel, come on. We both know Dad would have wanted us working together on this. There's no reason to make it complicated." I told him I'd check with Gerald and let him know. I hung up and immediately texted Gerald. "He knows something's happening. Don't confirm details." Gerald replied within minutes. "Understood. See you Thursday." The meeting was at Gerald's office downtown, a quiet building with thick carpet and the kind of furniture that had been chosen to make people feel like their business was serious. He spread the documents across the conference table and walked me through everything in plain language. The house in Asheville, paid off and appraised at $1.2 million. The investment portfolio across 4 accounts, and 41% of Whitmore Industrial, which at current valuation made up the largest portion of the estate. Your father was very deliberate about this, Gerald said. He revised the documents twice in the last 2 years. The final version was signed 8 months ago, witnessed and notarized. It is airtight. Why me? I asked. I hadn't planned to ask that, but it came out anyway. Gerald folded his hands. He told me you were the one who would protect it. His exact words were, "She'll know what to do with it without being told." I picked up the pen. I held it for a moment, then I signed. Gerald slid the documents into a folder and closed it with the quiet finality of someone who had done this many times and understood its weight. Rachel, one piece of advice. Secure your accounts today. New access credentials on everything. And be prepared, your brother will move quickly once he knows. I asked how quickly. Before the end of the week, he said. My guess. He was off by 2 days. Daniel called that same evening. This time his voice had dropped the casual register entirely. I spoke to Gerald, he said. He told me the meeting happened. It did, I said. Silence, then, and? It went well, I said. Another silence. Longer. Rachel. His voice shifted into something I recognized from childhood, the tone he used when he was deciding whether to reason with me or go around me. Dad built that company. I've been there for 15 years. I have relationships with every major client. I know every contract, every supplier, every person on that board. I know you do, I said. Then you understand why this doesn't make sense. Not as a business decision, not as anything. I understand you're upset, I said. I think we should talk in person. Not tonight. He hung up without agreeing. I sat at my kitchen table after the call ended and thought about Daniel at 22, fresh out of his MBA program, walking into Whitmore Industrial like he already owned it. My father had hired him into a junior management role and made him earn everything after that, division by division. Daniel had done the work. That part was true. He'd also spent 15 years acting like the company was already his inheritance, already decided, already sealed. My father had watched all of that and updated his documents anyway. Priya came over that night. She brought Thai food and didn't make me talk until I was ready. When I finally told her about the phone call, she listened without interrupting. He's going to escalate, she said when I was done. I know. Do you have someone who can be with you? Not me. I mean someone who can actually run interference if he shows up somewhere. I thought about my colleague Marcus from the EPA office. He was former Army Corps of Engineers, methodical and calm, and he'd offered to help with anything I needed when I'd told him about my father's death. I texted him that night. He replied in 4 words, just tell me when. The escalation came faster than I expected and from a direction I hadn't fully anticipated. 3 days after the document signing, I got a call from a woman named Judith Crane, who introduced herself as a managing partner at Crane & Associates, a wealth management firm based in Charlotte. She said my brother had referred her. He thought you might benefit from some guidance, she said. Given the complexity of what you've inherited, we specialize in family-owned businesses in transition. I kept my voice neutral. How did my brother come to recommend you specifically? We've had some preliminary conversations with him about the Whitmore Industrial account, she said. Nothing formal. He just thought you might want a second opinion before making any decisions. I thanked her for calling and told her I already had a team in place. I hung up and immediately called Gerald. He's approaching the company's accounts, I said. He doesn't have access, Gerald said. Not anymore. I removed his administrative credentials the morning after our meeting, as we discussed. He's creating the appearance of access, I said. That's different. Gerald went quiet for a moment. I'll send a formal communication to the board this week, clarifying the ownership structure. Today, I said, please. He sent it that afternoon. Within 48 hours, I heard from 2 members of the Whitmore Industrial Board, both of whom had received calls from Daniel suggesting that the estate was likely to be contested and that they should delay any formal transition meetings until things were resolved. Neither of them had agreed. Both of them called me directly, which told me something important. My father had spoken about me to these people. They knew who I was before the inheritance. Daniel hadn't counted on that. I drove up to Asheville that weekend to see the house for the first time since inheriting it. It was a large craftsman on a wooded lot, the kind of house that looks like it grew there naturally. My father had lived in it for 20 years. The last time I'd visited, We'd sat on the back porch and watched the light change over the mountains while he told me about a book he'd been reading on soil ecology. He'd been genuinely curious about my work in ways that surprised me sometimes. I walked through every room. His office still smelled faintly of the cedar oil he used on the bookshelves. The kitchen was clean and neat, dishes stacked in the cabinet in the order he always kept them. I sat in his chair in the study for a long time. On the way back to the car, I noticed something that made me stop. The side gate that led to the back garden was open. I always kept that gate latched when I visited, and the caretaker who managed the property had confirmed she hadn't been by since Wednesday. I walked around the perimeter of the house. Nothing was disturbed, nothing missing, but the feeling the open gate left me with didn't go away on the drive back. I called Marcus. He drove up the following day and walked the property with me. We didn't find anything concrete, but he suggested a security system with remote monitoring, and I had one installed before the week was out. Back in my apartment, I started building a clearer picture of what Daniel was doing. Marcus helped, using public records and professional databases, the same kind of open-source research I used for environmental assessments. The pattern that emerged was methodical. Daniel had begun reaching out to Whitmore Industrial's longtime suppliers and clients, framing himself as the point of contact for any concerns about the ownership transition. He was positioning himself as the stable center, implying I was the disruption. He'd also contacted a commercial real estate firm about the Asheville property, described as a family asset currently under review. The firm had sent a preliminary assessment to an email address I didn't recognize. None of it was illegal on its own. But taken together, it was a coordinated campaign designed to make his version of events feel established before mine could take hold. I spent a Sunday afternoon at my kitchen table writing down every instance I could document: dates, names, methods. When I was done, the legal picture was clear enough to act on. I called Gerald first thing Monday morning. "I want a cease and desist drafted by Wednesday," I said, and a formal notice to the board clarifying that he holds no role, no authority, and no access in connection with the estate. "I'll have both to you by tomorrow afternoon," he said. The cease and desist went to Daniel on Thursday via certified mail. He had to sign for it. He called within 2 hours. "You're going to regret this," he said. His voice was controlled, which was more unsettling than anger would have been. "I'm protecting what was left to me," I said. "That's not personal, Daniel. That's just what's happening. Dad would be ashamed of this." "Dad made a choice," I said. "He had 8 months to change it and didn't. Whatever his reasons were, I intend to honor them." Daniel hung up. I sat with the silence for a moment. Then I called Marcus and told him the call had happened. He came over that evening with groceries and cooked dinner, while I handled 3 emails from the board, 2 of whom wanted to schedule a formal introduction meeting as the new primary shareholder. We scheduled it for 2 weeks out. The next move came from somewhere I hadn't fully prepared for. My mother called on a Tuesday evening, her voice careful and a little too warm, the way it got when she was mediating something she didn't want to openly take a side in. "Your brother is very hurt," she said. "I know he is," I said. "He worked for your father for 15 years, Rachel. He built his whole life around that company. He built his career there," I said. "That's not the same as owning it." She was quiet for a moment. "Don't you think a little generosity would go a long way? He's your brother?" "Mom," I said gently, "Dad made a legal decision. I didn't engineer it. I didn't campaign for it. He updated his documents without telling either of us, and the result is what it is." She didn't have an answer for that. She shifted to asking about my work, and I let the conversation move in that direction, because there was nothing left to say about the other thing that wouldn't just go in circles. After we hung up, I thought about the years of family gatherings where Daniel had made comments about my career that were one layer too sharp to be jokes. Questions about when I was going to do something that actually moved the economy. Observations about government salaries delivered in front of guests. None of it had ever been called out directly, because he delivered it just below the threshold of undeniable. My father had heard it. He'd sat at those tables and heard every word. The board meeting happened on a Thursday, 14 people in a room with good lighting and better coffee. I'd spent the week before studying every major contract, every supplier relationship, every client account. I hadn't run the company, but I understood systems, and Whitmore Industrial's structure wasn't unlike the regulatory frameworks I worked with every day. At its core, it was about relationships and accountability. I introduced myself without preamble. I told them I understood that uncertainty about the transition had created some discomfort, and that I intended to move quickly to address it. I outlined my immediate priorities, a full financial review, a meeting with each division head individually, and a 60-day operational assessment before any structural changes were considered. One board member, a woman named Harriet who had known my father for 30 years, leaned forward at the end and said, "Your father talked about you often. He said you had his instincts but better judgment." I thanked her. I meant it. After the meeting, Marcus was waiting in the lobby. He raised an eyebrow when he saw my face. "It went well," I said. "Told you," he said. The formal contest to the will came 8 days later. Daniel had found an attorney willing to argue that my father had been unduly influenced when he revised the documents. The filing claimed I had manipulated a vulnerable elderly man into changing his estate plan, which would have been almost funny if it hadn't been the kind of claim that required a real legal response. Gerald called me the moment the filing landed. "This is without merit," he said, "but will need to respond formally and quickly. Do you want me to proceed?" "Yes," I said. "And Gerald, don't hold back. I want every document, every revision history, every witness statement, and every record of his mental capacity in the 12 months before he signed. Let's make this so thorough, there's nothing left to argue." It took 3 weeks to build the response. During that time, I kept working. I kept running. I kept cooking dinner and reading and calling Priya on weekends. The estate's legal machinery moved alongside my actual life without absorbing it entirely, which felt like a small victory in itself. The will contest was dismissed 6 weeks after it was filed. The judge's ruling was brief and direct. The documentation was comprehensive. The decedent's capacity was clearly established, and there was no credible evidence of undue influence. The estate stood exactly as my father had written it. I read the ruling sitting at my kitchen table on a Wednesday afternoon. I read it twice. Then I put it down and made myself a cup of coffee and stood at the window for a while, looking at the street below. Daniel didn't call. He didn't send a message. The silence from him was different from his earlier silences, which had felt like held breath before the next move. This one felt final, like a door that had closed from the inside. My mother called 2 days later. She said she was sorry about how things had gone. She said she hoped Daniel and I could find our way back to each other eventually. I told her I hoped so too, and I meant it, but I also knew that some distances don't close themselves. They require both people to move toward each other, and I couldn't do that for him. The month that followed was the first one in a long time where I didn't feel like I was watching for something coming at me from a direction I couldn't see. The Asheville house security system was fully operational. The board transition was underway. Gerald had finished filing the final estate documents with the county. Every account was locked down, every credential updated, every access point accounted for. I drove up to Asheville on a Friday evening and sat on the back porch until after dark. The mountains were the same shape they'd always been, the same darkness at the tree line, the same way the air cooled faster up here than it did in the city. I thought about my father choosing this house, this view, this particular way of living quietly in a place that didn't require him to perform anything. I thought about Gerald telling me what my father had said. "She'll know what to do with it without being told." I hadn't been certain of that when I heard it. I was more certain now. Not because I'd outmaneuvered Daniel, though I had. Not because the legal documents were airtight, though they were. But because I'd made every decision based on what was actually true rather than what would have been easier to believe. That was the harder work, and it was the work that mattered. In the weeks after, I took on the first real operational decision as the primary shareholder, a proposal to expand Whitmore Industrial's Environmental Compliance Division. It was a smaller revenue area, but it was the part of the company my father had been quietly building up for the last 3 years, and I understood it better than any other piece. The board approved the expansion unanimously. Harriet pulled me aside after the vote. "He would have liked seeing that," she said. I told her I thought he might have planned for it. Priya came up to Asheville the following weekend, and we sat on the same back porch with coffee and talked about everything except the estate, which felt exactly right. Marcus texted on Sunday to ask how things were going. I told him the ground felt solid again. He wrote back, "Then stand on it." I did. Looking back across the months from the phone call with Gerald to the dismissed court filing to the quiet of that porch, the thing that strikes me most isn't the size of what I inherited or the fight that came after. It's the clarity I found in the middle of it. Every time someone tried to make me doubt my footing, I went back to the same question: what is actually true right now? Not what's comfortable, not what would keep the peace, not what Daniel wanted me to believe about myself or about my father's intentions. What was actually, verifiably, documentably true. The answer was always the same. My father had made a decision. He'd had every reason and every opportunity to choose differently. He hadn't. That meant something, and I was going to honor it not by holding the money tightly or using it as a weapon, but by doing with it exactly what he believed I would. Something careful and deliberate and real. The company was in good hands. The house on the mountain was being lived in the way it was meant to be. And I was still the same person I'd been before any of this started, just standing on considerably more solid ground.